He walked into the courtroom expecting justice, but instead he was met with cold stares and a gavel that struck harder than any truth. A black man, standing before a judge who seemed determined to break him with the harshest sentence possible. No one questioned it. No one spoke up. But what the judge didn't know was that this man wasn't who he thought he was. And when the truth finally came out, the silence in that room spoke louder than any verdict. What happens when justice itself gets exposed? Marcus had built his life on discipline, fairness, and a deep belief in the law. As a respected prosecutor, he spent his days fighting for justice, standing in courtrooms where every word he spoke carried weight. Outside the courthouse, he was a father, a husband, and a man who believed that the system, though imperfect, could still be made to work for everyone. His mornings started with quiet coffee. His evenings ended with late nights of reviewing cases. To most, he was just another professional in a suit. But beneath that calm routine, Marcus was about to step into a storm he never saw coming. Because soon he wouldn't be standing behind the prosecutor's bench. He'd be standing in front of a judge, forced to defend not just his career, but his dignity. And the sentence waiting for him would shock everyone. Marcus had walked into that courthouse hundreds of times, but this time, everything felt different. Instead of standing with files neatly stacked in front of him, ready to present his case, he was led in through the side door, the one reserved for defendants. His wrists bore the cold bite of metal cuffs, his name replaced with a case number. The air that once carried his confident footsteps now echoed with whispers and stares. He wasn't Marcus the prosecutor anymore. He was Marcus the accused. The charge was minor, flimsy at best. A traffic violation twisted into something bigger, something darker. The kind of charge that should have been dismissed with a signature, yet somehow it carried the weight of a felony. Marcus knew why. His skin color spoke louder than his credentials. And in that courtroom, it didn't matter that he had put away dangerous criminals, or that he had spent his career fighting for the truth. To them, in that moment, he was just another black man standing before a judge. The judge's eyes never softened. His words, clipped and sharp, carried a tone Marcus had heard before, but always directed at someone else. You people, always finding trouble, a danger to society. It was the same prejudice Marcus had fought against from the other side of the bench, now cutting into him like a knife. Each sentence, each glare chipped away at his dignity. The prosecution pushed for the harshest penalty, even though the evidence was weak, and the judge nodded, as though it was already decided. Marcus's chest tightened as the gavel slammed. The sentence was harsher than anyone in the room expected, years stripped from his life for a crime that barely existed. The room fell silent, except for the shuffle of papers and the sound of his own heart pounding. He wanted to speak, to remind them who he was, what he had done for justice, but he knew, right now, no one cared. Yet beneath the weight of injustice, a truth burned. Marcus wasn't just any defendant. He was the man who had spent his career building the very cases that judges like this had ruled on. And in that silence, he knew something the judge didn't. The truth of his identity was about to come crashing down like a storm. The whispers in the gallery grew louder. People leaned forward, sensing something was wrong, something hidden. The gavel had fallen, but the story was far from over. Because the man they thought they had just sentenced wasn't going to fade quietly into the system. He was about to shatter it from the inside, and when the judge learned who he truly was, the silence in that courtroom would be deafening. The gavel had already struck, the sentence sealed. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of injustice pressing down on his chest like a stone. Years of his life had just been erased in seconds, not because of what he had done, but because of who he was. The courtroom was buzzing, yet it all sounded distant, muffled, like he was underwater. He could see the smirk on the prosecutor's face, the cold indifference in the judge's eyes. To them, he was nobody, disposable. Then came the twist of fate. The clerk, fumbling through the file, hesitated. The name on the paperwork wasn't just any name. It was one the courtroom had seen countless times before, stamped on cases, etched into records. Marcus Davis, lead prosecutor. The man who had stood in that very room weeks ago, arguing for justice on behalf of the state. The realization rippled through the gallery like a shockwave. The silence was suffocating. The judge's expression faltered, his composure cracking for the first time. His gavel trembled in his hand. This wasn't some nameless man he could dismiss with prejudice. This was the very prosecutor whose work had built the credibility of that bench, whose words had carried weight in shaping verdicts. And now he had condemned him as though he were just another statistic. Marcus's heart pounded as he raised his head, his eyes locking on the judge. For the first time, he wasn't speaking as a lawyer or a defendant. He was speaking through silence, through presence, through the undeniable truth of his identity. The judge's face drained of color, the courtroom thick with the stench of hypocrisy exposed. Everyone was watching. Everyone knew. And in that unbearable stillness, one question hung in the air like a blade. How could justice ever recover from what had just been revealed? The courtroom never felt the same again. The judge who had once held the gavel with unshakable confidence now sat exposed, his silence a confession of the prejudice that had driven his decision. The sentence remained on paper, but the truth had already been written across every face in that room. Justice had failed. Marcus walked out not as a man vindicated, but as a man forever changed, carrying the weight of a system that had tried to strip him of his worth in an instant. But his story did not end with humiliation. It became a mirror, forcing everyone present to confront an uncomfortable truth. If a man who had dedicated his life to justice could be reduced to nothing more than the color of his skin, what did that say about the millions with no titles, no influence, no shield to protect them? His ordeal was not just his own. It was the lived reality of countless others silenced, punished, or erased without the world ever knowing their names. And yet within that silence came power. Because stories like Marcus's cannot be buried forever. They rise, they echo, they demand to be heard. They remind us that racism is not hidden in the shadows. It stands in the open, dressed in robes, cloaked in authority, speaking with the weight of law. The question is, how long will we allow it to remain unchallenged? How many more Marcus Davises must stand in silence before the gavel of justice finally falls in the right direction? Because in the end, the measure of justice is not in words or verdicts. It's in whether we, as a society, choose to confront the truth or let history repeat itself.